And so now we can go to the most important part of this, which is the relationship between our real self and the form, our unmanifest formlessness is everything that arises, every form, including our body, our thoughts, our emotions, our separate sense of self, our ego that we're also, our mind that we're trying so hard to get rid of. What really is that? Where really is it? If I think I'm a separate person and I talk to you and I have some thoughts about you, is that a part of me or is that a part of you? And if you have some thoughts about me, is that mine or is that yours? If you're thinking about me and remembering a satsang we did a while ago, do I exist here or in your memories? If you visualize something that you would like to have happen, including a whole bunch of people, where do those people exist? Do they exist outside of you or in your head at that particular moment, or all of the above? So if your mind right now is going, I don't get this at all, it's okay. All I'm trying to do is just loosen up the absolute belief in concepts. Because if I believe that this is a human body that's separate and independently existing to everything else, then I'm going to fear the end of this body. I'm going to believe it started. It started when this body was born and it ends when it dies. But is even that true? Wasn't it assembled together for 9 months before the birth? And won't there be some disassembly after the death? Does it still exist then or not? When it goes back to its elemental nature and is recycled into something else, doesn't it still exist as something else? And even before conception date, didn't it exist in the body of my parents, a sperm and an egg? This is a really weird way, isn't it, to think about ourselves. But hopefully we're beginning to break down this absolute belief in the labels that we have. This is a body and I'm living in it, and at some point it's going to end and I'll have to get out of it, or I'll cease to exist, or something like that. Just to think like this begins to allow some space to really come to see what reality is. And there is nothing at all, no shape, no form, no manifestation that can exist independently from the formless awareness in which it arises, the formlessness, our real self. If the space wasn't here that this house is built in, would the house be able to be built? If the room here didn't have any space in it, would there be furniture in it? If all of this cannot exist without the space that it appears in, does it really exist independently of the space? They must be one and the same. Can you have a thought without the awareness of it? Can you hear a sound without the listening to it? And if you can't, then that sound and that thought must interbe with the awareness, the listening. Nothing, no thing can exist independently from the formless nature. Nothing at all actually exists outside of, separate to, the formless reality. All of this is shapes that formless reality is taking, and then we've stamped a label on that. That's a thought, that's a planet, that's a body, that's a dog, that's food. And if we really begin to look at that, we see it's really not so. Anything that cannot exist on its own, that depends upon something else, doesn't really have any existence of its own. So any form that seems to arise out of the formless cannot exist independently of the formless substrate from which it came. And as we begin to see this, and we must get really intensely curious about this, intensely curious. What is everything actually made of then? As we begin to really look, we begin to see that when I call something a label, I could really substitute any name. When I look at what I'm calling a human body, it's also the rain that fed the crops that was made into food that my body ate. It's the clouds, it's the soil, it's the grass, all of it. And it's also the space that it's sitting right in, the place, the location inside where it is. So when we're talking like this, you might notice that something doesn't really want to go here. Something inside doesn't really want to break this kind of down. And that is because, because ego resists, right? Ego resists everything in that way. It doesn't like to have its labels broken down. But what's the benefit of recognizing this, what I'm saying? What is the benefit? Well, a clear seeing, clearer each time you look like this. Don't expect a big epiphany right now, but today, from what we've said right now, it will be clearer than it was before. That nothing really exists independent of the self. And then next time you look, it will be even clearer, and then even clearer the time after. And little by little, every time I looked like this, I began to see that everything I thought was here, including my separate sense of self, which is really just a bunch of thoughts, memories, desires, experiences. None of those could exist without the head that they're being remembered in and thought about in. And the head couldn't exist without the food and the rain and the water and the grass and the soil, all of that. So even our separate sense of self is not really what we think it is. It's not a real actual thing. It's empty. It's completely made of emptiness. Everything from the smallest particle, subatomic particle, to the entire universe as a whole is completely empty of form. The one thing that everything is made of is completely insubstantial. Without this insubstantiality, none of this could have arisen. Has it really arisen then? Is it really what we think it is? And can we begin to move away from the labels, use them as a convenience, a functionality, but not really believing that there is such a thing as a car or a planet or an ego or a thought? And the benefit of this is that your experience becomes utterly quiet, peaceful, free of pain and suffering, free of fear, free of any potential even to suffer, because you come to know that everything is essentially empty. And if that feels a scary thing to recognize, that the world that I thought was there is essentially empty of form, that's a common and absolutely normal response. It was for me too. But as we begin to look at this, that fear will go. You're only coming to see how everything has always been. not really learning anything new in satsang. You're just coming to remember, to put your mind back together in recognition of the truth that's always been true. How would your life change when you don't really believe that this is a body anymore? When you don't really believe in the absoluteness of labels like that? How would your body heal and recover from things faster if you didn't believe in the absoluteness of the label? How would your relationships change when you realize that what you're looking at is yourself? How would your joy increase when you really get this? And most of all, an unshakable, unbreakable, utter conviction that there is absolutely nothing out there to fear. And that there is absolutely nothing in here to fear either. It becomes utterly quiet then, utterly quiet.